Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Justice. So in today's topic, we're going to be looking at little mistakes that produce bad outfits. And of course, you need to avoid making those mistakes so that the outputs will be wow. So the last point is very important. So I need you to watch to the end of this video to get the best part of it. So let's get right into it. Welcome to my channel. My name is Justice. On this channel, we sit and talk fashion tips, fashion business tips, sewing tips, fashion lifestyle, and many more. Please consider subscribing and watch my video to the end to get the best part of it. Now, the first mistake that we all make, should I say we, because it's like I'm no longer part of it. So, the first mistake a lot of persons make is not ironing their fabric before sewing. Imagine the kind of fabric you get from the market, especially the parts that has been squeezed. Fabric also includes the underlay, the lining, okay? Everything is squeezed. And now imagine placing your pattern on it. It's just going to come out very wrongly because by the time you finish sewing and ironing it, the measurement is going to expand and it's not going to give you exactly what you ordered. So it's going to be what I ordered versus what I got. You see this as very little, but it's very big. It can spoil the output of a garment. So before you start sewing a fabric, try to iron the fabric. It is the process of preparing the fabric that you get to understand how this fabric behaves and how to go about it. Iron the fabric, especially even if it's not just cotton. There are fabrics that shrink when you iron them. So when you iron and realize that this is how the fabric behaves, it will help you to know how to go about it, so that it will not be that after sewing you then have a smaller size or you have a bigger size. Okay, so iron every fabric you get, especially the ones that require ironing, before you start sewing. Preparation of fabric is very important before you proceed to cutting and sewing. Number two, little mistake. I'm calling them little mistake, but they are not actually little. Little mistake that a lot of persons make to produce bad outfits is not taking the right measurements. Not taking the right measurements. It's very important that everyone, whether beginner or advanced, take accurate measurements. And especially if you're not close to the person you want to sew for, endeavor to conduct a visual measurement class, right? So that you'll be able to see the figure that you want to sew for. It's one thing to take measurement, it's another thing to analyze the shape or the form that you want to sew for. Some two persons may have the same bust circumference, but their figure, their features are not the same. One may be busty and one may not be busty. Like the bust is very small and flat. So the way you go about manipulating their patterns may not actually be the same. So learn to take accurate measurements. Now, when taking measurements, a lot of persons make the mistake of approximating, right? You take the measurement and you have 0.75. Now you have 0.25 in between. You decide to approximate it to the bigger number. It adds to your measurements. It adds to your measurements no matter how small it is. By the time you finish approximating, and the garment comes out, you realize that it's bigger than what you expected. And the same goes to also underestimating the measurements. Okay, so you realize that it's become smaller than the actual measurement. So learn to take and mark accurate measurements. It brings out a very wonderful fit. Now, the next thing we're going to be looking at is using the wrong kind of needle for the outfit you want to sew. In fact, this part is going to frustrate you, but depending on the kind of fabric you're using, it can make the lines, your stitch line to shrink, right? And by the time you finish sewing, you realize that it's shorter than what you're supposed to have. So each fabric has its own size of needle to use. Some fabric require size 14 needle, size 16 needle, and some require 18 to 20, 21. Okay, if you're sewing something like chiffon and you use a bigger needle, you're going to have issues and it might be squeezing the fabric as you're sewing. Okay, and then using a blunt needle, it's very good. Like I've said in previous video, learn to prepare your sewing machine before you start sewing. There are times when you sew on the sewing machine, it's as if the fabric that is under is becoming shorter than the fabric that is on top. Okay, so you need to put that into perspective. If your machine does that, I think it's from the feed dog that happens, right? It happens most of the time. The fabric that is laid under becomes shorter than, and the one on top gets longer. So at every point in time of sewing, you need to measure or take measurement of what you're sewing to be sure that you're actually doing the right thing. In case one is becoming shorter and one is becoming longer, it's advisable you turn over and start from the other edge so that both of them can match up or meet up together and you don't run shortage of measurement. You may finish this and you realize that their lines are no longer the same. Okay, their meet up are no longer the same. One is shorter and one is longer. You begin to lose and sew again. And if it is a fabric that it happens that when needle pierces it and comes out, it begins to tear, then there's a problem already. Or the fabric begins to shrink. It's a problem on its own. So we need to take notice of this. Now, while I was teaching, I had a student that when she marks her stitch allowance or sewing allowance, if she gives 1 inch seam allowance, she's going to sew half-inch seam allowance. And by the time you realize it, the garment is bigger than normal. Okay, so this is a mistake that, if not put into consideration, it's going to affect the output of the garment. It's not that you did not measure well, it's not that you did not cut well, but while sewing, endeavor to remember the stitch allowance you gave and make sure you sew exactly on it. If you gave 1 inch seam allowance, endeavor to sew 1 inch seam allowance and make sure you measure it to be sure that it's 1 inch. Don't give 1 inch stitch allowance, seam allowance, stitch allowance, they mean the same thing. Okay, so don't give 1 inch stitch allowance and you're sewing 0.75, except you intentionally want to add to the measurements. If you do not want to add to the measurements, why would you sew 0.75 where you marked 1 inch for your stitch allowance? Now, if you're sewing 0.75, you're omitting 0.25. 0.25 on fabric put together is half an inch. Now, if you allow half an inch on one side, you allow half an inch on the other side, it has become 1 inch. So the measurement is going to be bigger by 1 inch. You see it? So no matter how small it is, it's adding to your measurement. The same goes to reducing. Okay, so if you have to sew 0.75 and you're sewing 1 inch, you're already reducing 1 inch from the entire measurements. I hope this is making sense to you. Now, aside ironing before sewing, this is very important. Aside ironing before sewing, don't wait until you couple everything on the garment before you start sewing. It's going to make the garment to look very rough. Okay, it's going to make it look homemade. We want our homemade garments to look like factory made, like a professional output. So once you sew, learn to iron, learn to press. There's a difference between ironing and pressing. As you iron, press bulky parts, press stitch lines, open up your seams and press them. Where you have a curve, use your arm. Use your curve arm, your bust arm, your whatever it is, and iron curvy parts with uncurvy surface. Iron straight parts on straight surface. It matters a lot. Don't iron a straight part on a curved surface. It's going to take the shape of the curve. And by the time you realize it, you wear the garment, you realize that the garment is having some kind of bulk where it's supposed to have a straight line. Okay? Iron every straight line on a straight surface. iron curvy lines on a curvy surface. If you iron a curvy line on a curvy surface, it's going to flatten it and it will not come out nice. All right. So these little things, I call them again little things, but they are very important that when you do not put them into practice, it's going to affect the fit and finish of your garment. All right. Don't forget to finish every garment perfectly well. Know the closures that every style needs and make sure you use them. Until I come your way very soon, please subscribe, like, share, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.